It was late afternoon in a quiet American town, the kind of place where the streets whispered secrets and the sunlight lingered longer than it should. The hum of distant engines floated through the air, but inside the small, retro diner, time seemed to stop. The smell of sizzling bacon and brewing coffee filled every corner, mixing with the faint scent of grease and old wood. The jukebox played softly, its notes bouncing off the turquoise walls and red booths, creating a sense of nostalgia so strong it could almost be touched. People murmured to each other, clinking cups and cutlery, until something happened that froze the moment, turning an ordinary afternoon into one no one would forget. Reed Dawson sat in his usual corner booth, the one that gave him a perfect view of the diner without being too obvious. To most, he was Red Dog, the biker with a reputation that stretched across the town. Tattoos snaked down his arms, his denim vest frayed and worn, and a gold cross hung heavy around his neck. His hands were scarred and calloused, hands that had gripped handlebars more than they had held kindness. His face, carved by life's hard edges, seemed untouchable, cold even. But there was something behind those dark eyes, a trace of fatigue, of loss, a hint that he had once carried a different story inside him. He stirred his coffee slowly, watching the sunlight flicker across the table, unaware that his day was about to change in the most unexpected way. If you believe kindness still exists in places you least expect, if you believe people can surprise you when hope feels lost, pause this video, like, comment, and subscribe to Tales Binanya. Stories like these remind us what humanity truly is. That's when she appeared. The woman stumbled through the diner door, her presence fragile, almost ghost-like. She looked thin, late 20s perhaps, wrapped in a gray sweater that hung loosely over her body. Her jeans were torn, her shoes mismatched, and in her arms, she carried a little girl no older than 3. The child's hair was tangled, her cheeks pale from the cold outside, her tiny hands gripping her mother's sweater for warmth. The mother's eyes scanned the room, not for a menu or a seat, but for mercy. The waitress gave a hesitant glance, uncertain what to do, and the other customers barely noticed her at all. But Reed did. He watched as she moved, hesitant, almost floating toward his booth. Then, instead of asking for a table, she knelt beside him, her eyes flicking nervously to his plate. Her voice shook as she whispered, "Can I take the leftovers for my daughter?" Silence fell like a blanket over the diner. Even the jukebox seemed to pause, leaving only the faint hiss of coffee machines and the occasional clink of a spoon. Reed stared at her, his heart tightening. The little girl pressed her face into her mother's chest, clutching the thin fabric of her sweater as if holding on for dear life. There was something in the woman's eyes that cut deeper than hunger, humiliation, desperation, the kind that makes your chest ache. And for Reed, it stirred a memory he had buried deep. Years ago, he had a family, a little girl, only 5 when life had torn them apart, a wife who couldn't handle his chaos anymore. He hadn't seen his daughter in years. Each night, when the roads were quiet and his motorcycle engine silenced, her face haunted him, wondering if she was safe, if she missed him, if someone cared for her the way he wished he had. And now, here was this woman, asking not for herself but for a child, the same way his little girl might have needed help once, and he hadn't been there. Something inside Reed shifted. Without a word, he stood. The woman's eyes widened, fear flashing across her face. Did she do something wrong? Did he? Instead, he slid his plate toward her and walked to the counter. The cook nodded silently as Reed whispered something. Moments later, he returned, carrying 2 takeout boxes stacked with warm food and a bottle of milk. He knelt down beside the woman, rough hands trembling slightly as he placed the boxes in her arms. "This isn't leftovers," he said, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "This is fresh, and there's enough for tomorrow too." Then he reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small folded bill, enough for a week's worth of meals. The woman's lips quivered. She stared at the food, then at him, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you help me?" Reed's eyes softened as he looked at the child nestled against her chest. "Because once I couldn't help mine," he said quietly. For a long moment, Silence wrapped around them. The diner seemed to hold its breath. Other bikers in the room shifted, swallowing hard, pretending not to wipe their eyes. Even the waitress, who had frozen at first, now brought a warm cup of cocoa to the little girl. Reed sat back slowly, heart heavy yet lighter than it had been in years. He watched them leave, mother and child, and he noticed something remarkable. Their eyes shone brighter than when they arrived. The weight they carried had been lifted, if only a little. The sound of the diner returned. Chatter, clinking cups, the soft buzz of the jukebox. But something had changed. Kindness had filled the room, warm and unexpected, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Later, as Reed rode his motorcycle home under the fading evening sky, he felt a warmth in his chest he hadn't known in years. Maybe it was hope, maybe forgiveness. The wind whipped past him, taking the years of regret he had carried like armor. Somewhere out there, he hoped his daughter was safe, maybe even cared for by someone kind, someone who believed in the power of a single act of compassion. And in that small diner, a thin woman and her child reminded everyone that day of one simple truth. A little kindness can ripple farther than we ever imagine. That night, Reed fell asleep with a quiet smile. Not the tough biker smirk, but a genuine, heartfelt smile. A part of him, long buried under scars and solitude, had returned. If this story touched your heart, like, share, and subscribe to Tales Binanya. And I want to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in Reed's place? Your words might inspire someone else watching right now. As the neon lights flickered on outside the diner, everyone who had been there knew they had witnessed something rare. A single act of kindness that spoke louder than any words ever could.